The girl with beautiful red hair and a surprisingly thin figure had been suffering from prolonged depression for a very long time. When she remembers how on the road that was flooded with sunset light, she saw pigs that were being transported to slaughter in a small truck. And now she was one of those pigs. She was also being transported to slaughter, only in a slightly larger truck. Every time this truck turned, the animal swayed from side to side and squealed loudly, and the girl just looked and cried bitterly. She could not help them in any way. At that time, she still didn't know that her fate would be much worse than that of those pigs that she saw that day. Her entire face was beaten, and there was no spark of life in her eyes. A lot of people with pitchforks gathered in the square. They were all shouting and rejoicing that this girl was about to be killed. In fact, she cried because she didn't feel sorry for the pigs at all, but for the villain from the novel she was reading. It was the villain, Haley, and now she was her, too. But this girl in the novel was very unhappy and sad, so it is quite obvious that one could sympathize with her. Her life was absolutely terrible. People around wanted Haley to suffer in hell, and when the girl heard that they called her trash and wanted her to die in the Maroon Castle, she realized that she could not expect salvation. That day, she was even pelted with eggs, and the only thought that was in the girl's head was that she did not understand why Haley lived like that. She was surprised by the fact that she had absolutely no idea that even if she did evil for the sake of others, in the end, everything ended exactly like that. While she was killing people to help someone, and cursing to make someone a king, and also taking on someone else's shame. Those same someones became the main characters of this world. In the end, as expected, they simply abandoned her and killed her, finally turning away from the girl. And the sad side story from the villain's point of view was fascinating and made the main characters look nasty. So Roman was pretty short. Haley was a villain, and the girl somehow moved into her body and also became her, so now the same fate awaited her. While the girl was being taken to her death, the knights who accompanied her were constantly arguing about something, and because of this, they could not even give her a minute of peace. One of them even tried to talk to Haley, but the commander said he would be damned if he did. The girl, of course, was very indignant upon hearing this, because it was absolute nonsense. She decided to take revenge on this man, and touched him. Haley wanted to scare him in this way, so she pulled him towards her. The man immediately screamed loudly and told him to let him go. Because it was already evening outside, Haley was very cold, so she took the cloak from this knight, and he did not object because he did not want to be cursed. The rest of the way, she thought about what a terrible fate had been sentenced to her, and this made her sad. Of course, getting into the novel is very good, but she did not become. Wouldn't it be terrible to be a villain who did not have long to live? Maroon Helly was just a sorceress who wanted to be loved, and it was very sad to watch her suffer from a lack of love, pretending to be strong. However, because she was too naive, she was easily used by people and eventually became a money-obsessed demon in the eyes of everyone else. She was also nicknamed the Enemy of the Three Kingdoms. And after causing harm to nobles, Haley was eventually sentenced to death. She was sent to Maroon Castle to die there all alone, which was actually the worst death, and it was all because she became the villain of the century. The kingdom wanted to cut off her head, but the church was categorically against it because she could use forbidden magic, so cutting off her head would not be enough. That's why they sent her to the wilderness called Maroon Castle. That's where the girl who moved into Haley's body was going. If you send her to the land infected, that is, panic energy, and force her to breathe the infected air, then Haley would eventually become a corpse and forget who she is. Prisoners, like the girl, who were inconvenient to execute with postcards and miles named Marin, were sent to this place. The girl tried to talk the knight out of his mind. However, the chieftain said that her tricks were useless because they were under the protection of the church. Haley was, of course, disappointed by this. However, she asked that they at least give her a little money before locking her in there for the evening. Yes, of course, they didn't give her anything because the knights knew that she had stolen so much that she could have even built her own kingdom. But the girl didn't know where she hid this money and didn't see the point in all this because she was supposed to die soon anyway. When the sun had almost set beyond the horizon, they finally arrived at the desired location. They stopped opposite a cliff, at the bottom of which a river was raging. When Haley looked out, she realized that it didn't look like a castle at all, and she even had an ominous premonition. She didn't understand what was happening because in this place, there weren't even any paths along which a person could walk. In the original, the story also began after Haley was abandoned in Maroon Castle. So the girl didn't even recognize this part. Then she realized that the way she got into this castle was terribly sinister. The girl was unhooked from the horses and her carriage was sent straight to the cliff. People wished for her to roll on the cursed ground until her last breath. And eventually the girl fell over the cliff and into the water. Haley really couldn't believe that all this was really like this. She thought it was very inhumane to throw people off a cliff like that. After she fell into the water, she immediately realized that she had nothing to breathe. This whole fate was excruciating, and the girl could not believe that she would actually die. That's how it was. She absolutely could not understand how the original heroine could survive at all, and she would also really like to be given the abilities of this girl, because she still got into this story not of her own free will. She spun from side to side in the water and wanted to find at least some ray of salvation. Eventually, the girl saw a branch. Haley grabbed onto it, and eventually managed to get out of the cart. She held onto that branch as her last hope. Then the water around her became transparent, and the demonic energy disappeared. Rather, it was absorbed into Haley's body. The girl did not understand at all what was happening, and then, a second later, she felt someone's hands on her wrist. And after that, she found herself on dry land. And when she started coughing up water from her lungs, she herself did not understand what had just happened. She had a feeling as if she was absorbing energy. However, she didn't understand how this could be, because Haley was forever deprived of mana and could never use her magic again. When the girl was about to get up on her feet, she suddenly heard a loud cry from a small child. He grabbed his green hair and said that he thought he would die. He asked how she could grab his hair so rudely. It was very impolite of her. Then this stranger suddenly looked at Haley and asked who she was anyway, and how he managed to survive. He assumed that she had cleansed him. The kid started asking a lot of questions that the girl didn't understand at all. She didn't understand a word of what he said, and didn't understand at all why the child was talking to her. When she assumed that he thought that she had grabbed him by the hair, and assumed that the branch she had grabbed was this beautiful child. She probably couldn't know anything, but she was at least glad that she survived. Haley introduced herself to this child. His name was Dryad. Then she lay down on her back and said that she did not understand anything about what he said, so she would like at least a little clarification. The Dryad immediately said that she clearly knew that the girl took her and cleansed her, because she was dying in the infected lake. The girl then realized that when she spoke about purification, she meant that Haley absorbed demonic energy. Then, Haley said that since she was her savior, she would like the girl to accompany her to Morin Castle. The Dryad explained that the Baron's castle was a place that was barely visible even after half a day's journey due to the contaminated lands. The terrain there was harsh, and there were no roads for people. However, since Haley insisted so much, the girl knew the way, so she could take her. She also thanked Haley for saving her when she was dying from infection. However, Haley, due to the fact that she experienced too much emotional shock, even fell asleep. At that moment, the Dryad felt someone's gaze on her, and when she turned her head to the side, she saw an evil creature hiding in the bushes. This earth was the place where corpses and lemon straw jump out on every path. The Dryad had already completely forgotten about this because she had slept in the lake for a long time, so to see this monster was a defeat for her. When this creature started running straight at her, she quickly screamed. The girl tried to hide behind her hands and asked to be spared. In the end, she even thought about what would happen to her. She had only just been cleared, and now she was supposed to die again. However, this creature attacked Haley directly, after which a bright light appeared and it turned into a beautiful snow-white rabbit. When the Dryad saw that it was just a rabbit charged with evil, she calmed down. He was cleansed when he touched the body of this woman. Then she realized that it was not only her, but other infected creatures could now be cleansed by the power of this man. She immediately became interested in who this woman was, since she was capable of such miracles. In the end, the row came to the conclusion that it was very striking and suspicious that she looked at this girl from all sides and made a final decision. In order to live to the end of her term, she had to stay close to this person at all costs. So when Haley regained consciousness, she immediately told the whole story. Haley was very surprised when she found out that she had cleaned the rabbit, and immediately asked how she had done it. The Dryad was very upset. She did not understand how the girl could not know anything about this. She thought that she would finally be able to get out of this place as soon as the girl woke up. But Haley was even more upset, because she thought he was a loyal baby who stayed with her to guard her while she was unconscious. But in the end, it turned out that he simply could not go anywhere without her squad replied that, since she had already figured it all out herself, she suggested that she try to do at least something and turn someone back into a normal state. Haley doubted that she would succeed, but she decided to try. First, she wanted to get rid of the annoying weeds that she was lying on. When she stood up, she saw that the place where she was lying had turned into bright green grass. The girl assumed that she would succeed. After all, without trying, she was able to cleanse both the bellflower and this grass. She believed that if she touched other living creatures, she would be able to turn them back, which is exactly what happened to the tree as soon as she touched it with her hand. Haley was amazed. She didn't know that she had a body that absorbed filth itself as soon as she touched something. She knew that she must have some special incredible and simply stunning ability, but she couldn't even imagine that it would turn out to be so useful. The Dryad was happy that this girl had unprecedented strength, so she turned to the girl and asked if it was true that she was an outstanding person, since she could now do such things. She didn't understand how the girl could end up in such a forgotten place, since she had something like that. Haley replied that she was not exactly an outstanding person, she was just a little famous, and because of that, she committed many sins. She was supposed to be executed, but instead, they just threw her into this place. So she was able to survive, and also ended up in this wasteland. The Dryad was very surprised when she heard that she was a violator. Haley knew that since she had been trapped in the villain's body, she had to accept her fate. However, she wasn't going to clean up in vain. A year later, as in the original story, her motto as a person who has been transported to an unknown world for the rest of her life is to live long and quietly, which is exactly what she was going to strive for. Haley soon set off with the Dryad. They were going to live in an empty castle in the middle of the infected zone. Even though there shouldn't have been any abundance there, she could still be a little lonely. It was important for her at that moment not to die. And besides, the forest spirit Dryad was with her, so she definitely wouldn't be bored. The world was supposed to be saved by the main character anyway, and Haley took on the role of the villain that everyone hated. She thought it would be best to self-isolate pancakes of all the common good. While the girl was getting up, she accidentally fell and was again able to clear a small area of grass underneath her. Haley saw a beautiful flower and brought it to life. She asked if the Dryad had thought that the best thing would be to touch everything along the way and experiment with abilities. She thought that it would be very good if at least something cleared up while they were walking, but the detachment did not share her joy. She considered the girl to be very reckless, and asked what Jana would do after her strength ran out before they even reached their destination. She also explained that when the sun sets, the temperature will become even lower, and therefore spending the night in this damp and contaminated forest will become even more dangerous. Haley, of course, didn't want to spend the night there. After all, they still had about half a day to go, so the road was not short. The Dryad took her by the hand and said that first, they needed to get to the castle, find housing, and from there they could begin the cleansing. Thus, they walked along a dangerous path that was teeming with infected creatures, but eventually they were able to reach their goal. This was the place where they were to live, the Moron Castle. From a distance, it looked even more frightening. When they entered his territory, Haley was glad that they managed to do it before sunset. Dryad was scared and suggested that they quickly enter. The air was so terrible that she began to feel sick. But as soon as they opened the doors, a bright purple light immediately shone on them, and a huge screech was emitted. They didn't expect anything like this, and because of this, they were a little scared, and everyone immediately started screaming. However, Haley realized that most likely these were mandrakes. Eventually, the filth inside the castle was so pure that it could not be compared to what was outside. Perhaps that is why the bell let him dine from his mouth through a loud tantrum. But for Haley, who was forced to hide from the whole world, there was no better place to find. She believed that with her incredible power, she could cleanse this smell and create her own cozy refuge where she would live until her death, in solitude and tranquility. And from the moment she first came to that place, a whole year passed. The area around was already unrecognizable. It had completely changed. Haley stood in her garden on a beautiful, warm spring day, planting a new seedling with Dryad. The girl didn't know what was the point of being angry and rushing, because if you dwell on the past and get angry, you can ruin your tomorrow. This was all wisdom left to them by the ancient sages. However, Dryad did not understand what the meaning was. After all, it could have been easily understood even without turning to these sages. The girl replied that for a 100-year-old belle like her, perhaps so. However, a person's life is short, so they commit a lot of stupid things along the way. At that moment, Haley was incredibly happy because real strawberries had finally grown in her garden. The girl looked completely different now. She was happy. She had beautiful black hair with silver tips, and she was no longer a villain. The Dryad she picked up on the road a year ago turned out to be a very talented farmer while they were together. Strawberries with the forest spirit. The girl began to get confused and forget that she had ended up in Roman. Butterflies were fluttering everywhere. The sweet smell of strawberries tickled her nose. The girl was truly happy that everything worked out exactly this way. At that moment, while the belle was picking strawberries, she turned to him and said that it would be incredibly wonderful if they could live like this all their lives. Just the two of them. When Doriata heard this, she was very scared. She did not understand how they could live together at all. For her, it was very scary. While the girl was exploring and cleaning the castle, she was able to discover a very interesting fact. Namely, what she does is rather consuming bad energy than cleansing. Thanks to a body that could survive on filth, she did not die of hunger. But the real Haley was originally a girl with beautiful, rose-like crimson hair. And while Haley herself was clearing the smell of crows from contamination, they really became coal black, which made her a little wary. But she didn't attach much importance to it, because she was happy with it as it was. During this time, Haley was able to restore part of the garden and stone fence every day. However, now in order to eat, she had to go to the very border of the infection. And this was inconvenient. As she passed by the lake, she really hoped that since she continued in the same spirit, perhaps it would someday clear up. She really wanted this. Haley was one of those who, with persistence and perseverance, sees through to the end. Even mobile farming games. So, if this were a game, she would be like a squirrel collecting free coins by watching ads every hour to quickly achieve her goal. The girls would also really like for another forest spirit to appear. Bellflower was certainly good at farming, so this time I'd like a humble spirit who could cook and clean well. At one point, when Haley was finally directing the Sharp One to try again and clear the area, she suddenly heard some strange sound in the bushes nearby. In these vast domains of Marin, she was the only person. Besides her, there were only infected plants and monsters, and also walking corpses of exactly this kind. She met, when she was heading out on her walk, a fair-haired man who was a zombie began to approach her closer. Haley started to run away from him. This was her territory. She didn't want him to interfere with her peaceful world, but the zombie eventually grabbed her. She really hoped that she could use her purification and he wouldn't kill her, and she could survive. However, at that moment, this man spoke to her and asked where Haley Marin was. His face was too close to Haley's face, he said, looking me straight in the eyes, that he had come to kill this woman. The girl did not know who he was and why he knew her, but then suddenly the stranger said that the woman who destroyed his family had to pay. And when she heard these words, she immediately understood that it was one of the main characters of the original, a man who hated Haley with all his soul. And this is the man who was eventually supposed to kill her. His name was Reinhard Winter. For some reason, he couldn't even finish his sentence, and suddenly fainted. Luckily, at that moment, he was able to let go of the girl, and she looked at him in surprise. I don't understand why he fainted in that particular place. Of course, Haley couldn't leave him there, so after a lot of effort, she finally dragged his body to her estate. The girl was very upset that she listened to the bell and began to clean the entire surrounding area. Now, she came across this man who was clearly angry towards her. But the girl believed that since she was a person who had fallen into the world of the novel, if she acted differently, the original should change accordingly, and the ending. When the girl brought Reinhard to the castle grounds, the top triad was shocked to see him. She asked why she brought them a corpse. She explained that he was still alive, but she thought that he really looked as if he was about to die. Besides, it was only a matter of time before he became a real corpse, because being in that area was very dangerous. The novella that the girl got into was called I Think It's Not Bad to Have Several Husbands. Haley was responsible for creating the demons. She was thrown into the Marin castles and cursed the whole world for a year because she was simply set up. Then she suddenly met her death at the hands of this man. Haley's death became the last key, and the Marin castle turned into a cradle for the Devas. The demons that were born from the anger, sadness, and fear of Haley broke out of the infected zone and committed all sorts of atrocities throughout the Empire. Then, according to the plot, the main character and 4 men in love with her went on a campaign to pacify them. That was the main plot of this novel. And the one who killed Haley and left Marin Castle was the Demon King-level protagonist. This handsome, blue-eyed, fair-haired man lost his human essence when he joined the heroine's squad. And now, Reinhard was lying in Haley's yard, completely unconscious. When the Dryad examined him, she said that he was defiled by magic. If the girl had found him a little later, he would have died and wandered there like those corpses outside. The girl also said that it impressed her. Usually people who get to this place go crazy during the day, but it was clear from him that he had been there for a long time. Haley immediately explained that all this was because he was the main character with a tragic fate, who was later to awaken as a half-human, half-demon. He will not be able to live or die and will revolve around the main character and then commit suicide because he will not be able to withstand all this. The Dryad told her to do something with this man. Because he was not yet completely defiled, she could cleanse him now, and soon he would come to his senses. But the girl just watched him for a while. She considered this the main problem, because she didn't know if he could try to kill her as soon as he woke up. But she had no choice when Dryad yelled at her. Haley really hoped that he wouldn't wake up in her backyard, but there was nothing she could do about it. Then the girl began the purification process. In fact, the reason why she saved Reedhart, knowing that he came to kill her, was because he was the only innocent victim among all these heroes. And since the girl read the novel and sympathized with this character, she really could not leave him in such a difficult situation. His family was destroyed, and he, the only survivor, dedicated himself entirely to the place. Haley spent a long time cleaning it. She felt the amount of magic that it held within itself. and it was very huge. She was going to help him as soon as possible, and at this time she had to send him away as quickly as possible. She couldn't get involved with the original heroes. It could be too dangerous. At that moment, the man suddenly woke up. He quickly grabbed the girl by the hands and threw her to the ground. He immediately told her to say who she was and where she had dragged him. Helen was very wary. She did not understand how he could wake up so quickly. Dryad immediately began to protect her. She grabbed onto this man and began to bite him. The girl quickly explained what it was as soon as the man heard that it was the Maroons' castle. He asked what she was doing in this place. Helen immediately said that she was there doing housework, cleaning and cooking, washing. Then the man asked, "Does this mean you live here?" Helen replied that this is exactly how the man then demanded to know who she was. But the girl did not answer because she did not know what the right thing to do would be. She also didn't understand the fact why he acted as if he didn't know who she was. But Reinhard definitely couldn't help but recognize her. But then, suddenly, the girl remembered that in the original, when he came to the castle and killed Haley, he woke up as a half-man, half-demon. At the same time, he lost all his memories. But this time, the reason for the memory loss was not because he became a half-demon. On the contrary, his brain was damaged, and all this was caused by the displacement of filth and the magic of purification. Helen then realized that this all explained why he didn't remember anything. He really forgot absolutely everything, even the fact that she was his main enemy. Then Haley extended her hand, she greeted him, said her name, and said that she was his savior. The girl was very happy that now she was saved, and she would not need to somehow persuade this man not to kill her. Haley explained that she had saved his life, and was also the one who would save his life again that night, because the sun would soon set, and without her master's permission, he would wander around these overgrown lands. However, he could not worry, because that night, he would be able to calmly rest in her estate. They really had no food at all. However, she could only provide him with a warm place to sleep and rest. However, at that moment, Helena suddenly heard a loud sound coming from the sky. It was thunder. The girl was very surprised. However, she assumed that it was like a salute in honor of her rescue. It was a sudden spring thunderstorm. So in order not to get wet, they decided to go into the estate as soon as possible. In fact, the beautiful old castle, which is located in the very center of the contaminated lands, did not look very attractive from the inside. It is known that for the last 100 years, not a single living creature has left this place, and attempts to measure the level of contamination were simply impossible. As soon as they entered the castle, the man looked around and said that it turned out to be completely different from what they say out loud. In fact, Helen was not at all surprised that the first guest who visited their house could not close his mouth in surprise. She explained that there was nothing surprising about this. After all, she had a wonderful opportunity, and she was able to easily cleanse this place and bring it to the state that she liked. Helen really worked very hard to enter this castle for the first time and survive. After numerous cleansings, there was no place left where a person could not enter. Magic that purified with a single touch was not even considered a problem, but what they desperately needed was rather fire and food, and so far, none of these problems had been solved. As soon as they entered one of the rooms, where the window was wide open and a downpour was flying into the room, they were very surprised. The Dryad immediately screamed at her mistress and asked why the ark had gone out. She also asked which of the two was responsible for supporting it. Of course, this person was Helen. She was very worried. The girl asked for forgiveness and said that she simply did not expect it to rain. In fact, if we speak in simple words, their civilization at that time was at the level of primitive people, and therefore, extinguishing the fire became a very serious difficulty for them, and a cause for scandal. The Dryad was very disappointed. She was angry and screaming. The girl did not understand why she alone had to do all the housework. Haley couldn't respond to this because she was right, so she just had to apologize to her and say that she was very sorry. She explained that the fire could be lit again, so she asked the Triad to stop scolding her in front of their guest, because she felt very awkward about it. But the forest spirit yelled at her again, and said that it was definitely not possible to put a guest to bed in the cold. So she had to take responsibility and make a fire before going to bed. Eventually, the girl brought new branches that were not wet, closed the window, and took 2 special stones to start the fire again. Haley really hoped that it would light up, but for a while she couldn't do anything. She assumed that it was most likely because the boards under the firewood were already wet, and that was why she couldn't do anything. However, the man intervened in their conversation and said that she clearly did not do it, that she definitely could not have started a fire with these 2 unfortunate stones. Helen didn't understand why he doubted her. After all, sometimes she had already managed to do this. In the end, Reinhardt sat down next to her and asked her to just step aside and let him help. The man took out a special tool, and with the first swing of it, he was able to create a spark strong enough to ignite their firewood. When the girl saw this, she was amazed and immediately asked where he bought this fantastic thing. She also desperately needed it. The man showed her the thing and said that it was in a forge or a shop. He had heard that sometimes it was also sold in taverns for travelers. Well, Haley still insisted that it was some kind of magic, because she had never seen a fire being lit with such ease. The man laughed and said that it was definitely not magic, because if it were, it would cost much more, and the man would not be able to afford it. Haley was surprised. She couldn't believe that there were such beautiful objects that even magic wasn't needed to make a fire so easily. The man said that if she needed a permanent fire, she needed to buy a magic hearth that could keep the fire going almost forever. The girl, of course, did not know that such a thing existed. She could not believe that in this world where people live, where these were truly civilized things. However, there was nothing in her damned castle. Therefore, all this time she lived like a primitive man. She had to get up with the sun and go to bed with the sunset, and also do a lot of unnecessary and difficult work. At that moment, Haley's bell suddenly entered their room, and when she saw it, she was immediately happy. She was going to show him what instrument Reinhardt had. However, she saw his shocked expression and immediately asked what was wrong with him. When she asked what was wrong with her expression, the bell did not answer. She turned to Mr. Reinhardt and asked if he would like to try their strawberries. After all the preparations were completed, Haley and her faithful friend lay down to sleep on the floor next to the fire, and the guest was placed on a small sofa. They were arguing about something all the time, and Reinhard simply watched them and tried to understand who this woman was. She was very suspicious to him. She had the same face and the same appearance. However, this woman definitely could not be Haley Moron. That evil sorceress definitely could not smile like that. So he wanted to know who this woman was, who worked with her fragile, twig-like hands and lived with the forest spirit. She was happy with just a few strawberries that she managed to pick, and smiled with eyes that did not contain a drop of malice. For him, it was as if it was not the evil sorceress Haley, but another Haley, who was unjustly accused and imprisoned in the castle. Because of this, the man was confused. He did not understand who kind of person she was, and how he should now behave with her. We wanted him to be a puppet created by the Winter family all the time. No one ever treated Reinhardt normally. The father always claimed that his life definitely did not belong to the guy himself. It belonged to his family, and that was all he had at all. My father said that a man should never forget that he existed only for the sake of his family, and also should not trust anyone. Reinhard was supposed to be an Iron Man who only acts for the good of the family, the ideal heir that was created in the Winter Duchy. Father always claimed that emotions are the courage of the weak. The heir of Winter does not need any emotions. He must always be cold-blooded and have a clear mind. Also, he should never hesitate. After all, they always know the right answer. Since childhood, it was really not easy for Reinhard. However, he remembered all these rules and tried to follow them. So, he grew up to be the ideal heir that his father wanted him to be. He threw away all his emotions. He didn't know his own desires. He lived only as his family wanted. And when Winter's mouth was destroyed, nothing changed anyway. He was given one last mission. He had to avenge everyone he loved. He had to avenge Haley. In the end, for him, revenge turned out to be a real duty, and Reinhard, no matter what, had to find the girl and kill her. His engines were not sadness or a sense of loss, but only the duty and responsibility that had been placed on his fragile shoulders, so that even then, he did not feel any emotions. For the sake of this revenge, he was even ready to die himself. However, having won, she did not grant him even such an honor. For some reason, the girl left him alive. Haley said that he had to live so as not to forget what she did. The man thought that she was acting as if she felt guilty about it, but he thought that it was all a deception for the one who destroyed an entire family. He asked why she did all this at all. Did she really achieve what she wanted? But of course, Haley didn't answer this question. It was none of his business. After that, he challenged her again and again, and lost time after time with each failure, and the sense of duty that fueled his vengeance eventually began to weaken. And one day, there was only one curiosity left. He considered it funny because he was so obsessed with the object of his revenge that for the first time in his life, he wanted to know about another person. And incredible news came to him a few days later. He heard that the witch Haley had finally killed the King of Hold and was captured by the Crown Prince and exiled to Marin Castle. Of course, the guy couldn't believe it. He didn't expect that she would be captured by some crown prince and then obediently sent into exile somewhere very far away. The woman who turned out not to die, even if she was killed, ended her journey with just a reference to the end of this world. His battle had ended so senselessly that he no longer had any purpose in life or responsibility to bear, and he felt very sorry for it. At first, of course, he tried to live, forgetting about her. Tried to find a job. He changed his entire name, profession, environment, in order to forget about his family. and just live an ordinary life, as he always dreamed of. A whole year had already passed, and only then did Reinhard realize that he had nothing left. For him, life without challenging Haley was completely meaningless. For him, created to be an heir, there was no self or desire of his own. Once she realized this, he had one decision. He had to finish his place. So he went to Marin Castle. He wanted to kill Haley and then end his own life, too. He stole a horse and simply ran away. Of course, the man first thought that he could do all this. However, in the end, life turned out to be a completely different side. The next morning, after he arrived at this castle, Reinhard did not want to sit without work, so he decided to help the girl and chop some wood for her. When she saw this, she immediately asked him to stop, because he could not believe that they actually forced him to work, and he was their guest. Well, the man explained that he volunteered because if he sits idle, his whole body hurts. So for him, this is only a joy. After that, Haley asked if he would like to eat some strawberries, because if he still had some dried meat left from yesterday, she could share it, and thus exchange everything. The man handed her the last pieces of meat, and Haley was very happy about it. Reinhard himself did not understand at all what he was doing in this place. He still did not take his eyes off her for a moment, and her behavior became more and more strange. He noticed that she was cleaning the filth, because of which she lost mana, and he suspected that the cunning witch was only pretending to have lost her powers in order to deceive him. However, the longer he continued to watch her, the clearer it became to him that Haley Marin had lost her memory. Moreover, she lived completely deprived of mana and common sense. And yet, he didn't know whether he could continue to consider this girl as the object of his revenge. At that moment, there were many hesitations in him. He believed that it would be wrong to judge this person, who looked like an ignorant child, for past actions that she could not even remember. He didn't know what to do next. Was it right to stay with this woman? Ultimately, to sort out these mixed feelings, he had to first observe her. He wanted to see everything for himself and make the right judgment. Reinhard believed that perhaps this was even his chance to understand what his true feelings were, and decide whether the words about Haley being a villain were true. He thanked the girl for the strawberries and said that everything was very tasty, and also asked if he could help her with anything else. In fact, the advent of the Heartflight brought very big changes into their lives. He was like a god from a myth, who gave people fire. He gave them a knife that instantly lit a flame in their miserable lives. And that wonderful meat, marinated in sweet spices, became an even greater triumph for them. This is the first sweet that Haley tried on this damned land, where the only seasoning was rock salt. For her, it was like a revolution in her mouth. One day, she turned to Reinhard and said that they needed civilization, because otherwise it was very difficult for her to live. She told him to tell how he got to this place, because he could have done it on a horse or in a carriage, so there had to be at least one. They argued for a long time about all this, and in the end, Reinhard said that there was no road, and he walked alone the whole time. The bell suggested that perhaps there was some shortcut. However, the man responded negatively to this as well. He said that he had never seen anything like it. Haley was very upset that even after her touching speech, he still refused to cooperate with them. She took offense at him and said that she actually saved his life from death, but for some reason he decided to repay her in such a terrible way. Reinhard immediately replied that this was not the case. He came using the map as a guide and pointed to a small mark with which he got there. He said that this mark was probably the castle in which she lived at that time. Haley immediately grabbed this card and began to study it carefully. She believed that this could be her key to victory. The Dryad immediately explained that Haley had not eaten flour for a very long time, and because of this, she was clearly not herself. She also said that if they had seeds, they could do farming. However, there is practically nothing to get in this place. But now they had a map. Accordingly, they could correct this situation. They would be able to buy wheat seeds before sugar, everything they need for life. But then suddenly, Haley had one very serious problem, because she did not know and could not read the cards. Reinhard replied that he didn't see a problem with that because he knew how to do it. The girl was immediately delighted and asked if that meant that she could ride a horse and, perhaps, drive a carriage. The man thought about it after that and laughed and said that of course he had never tried it. However, he thought that in general he could handle it because he knew the theory. When Haley saw that he laughed at her, she was a little indignant. Of course, she was upset by the fact that he thought he could do absolutely everything, but she was not capable of anything. In fact, Marin Castle had generally maintained a policy of isolation. But in an emergency, they decided to accept a little help from the outside. Haley decided to end this primitive era, and it was finally time to bring civilization to their beautiful castle. In the evening, they went deep into the forest. They took everything they needed with them. and the forest spirit went too. The dryad told them to be careful, never pick up or eat anything, never help anyone, and also not follow anyone. In general, follow only their own path. Haley was indignant. She didn't like the fact that he considered her a child. In the end, Reinhard hurried them, and they set off on their way. She thought that he had almost died the previous day, so she didn't understand how he could be so reckless. He could absorb this demonic energy with his whole body, and therefore he was in great danger. And she noticed this from the first meeting, but his stride was too wide. So Haley even had to run a little to keep up with him. She ended up tripping and almost falling. Luckily, Reinhard caught her and warned her not to run like that again. It could be really dangerous. He said that they needed to minimize the time of contact with demonic energy. If only a certain amount of energy could be purified in a day, then it was very unwise to pave the way from the very beginning. He thought it would be best to first go for the bare necessities, and then, while they were using them, slowly lay out the rest of the route. But Haley asked what was going on with him, because at this rate, he would become a walking dead man before he even got to the village. The man didn't care. The main thing was that it wasn't bad at all. The girls certainly didn't like it. However, she had no choice, and she also didn't have the habit of holding hands with men. However, in such a situation, there was nothing to be done. She simply had to do it. He extended his hand. She said that she would clean it along the way so that it would not become infected. This would be the most effective. But the man said that he could cope without it, so he walked forward. Haley was very surprised that he refused to take her hand. She walked behind him at a very leisurely pace, so as not to fall again, and decided that it would be worse for him, so she didn't dwell on it. Of course, a walk through the contaminated land could hardly be called romantic, and they had to walk along dead, fungus-covered trees. But despite this, it wasn't all that bad. The sky was still blue, and the clouds were white, just like the sugar and flour that should have been waiting for her at the end of the journey. In the end, the contamination zone turned out to be much wider than the girl thought. There was no place around the forest to go, and the road seemed completely endless to her. When Haley was already tired, they had walked halfway. The man said that she should learn to look at the map, because it was a very useful skill. Before moving to this world, all she did was study. So now here, she definitely didn't want to do that. Well, Reinhard said that it was all very easy and simple. He pointed to the map and showed her where they were. After that, he told her how easy it was to navigate using this map, but the girl didn't listen to him. She simply turned around and started to leave. Of course, the man was very upset that she did this, but he simply had no choice. At that moment, Haley approached the water, which was all black, and she looked at it without taking her eyes off it. In fact, it was the black lake that is visible as if in the palm of your hand from the top of the castle. She was in the castle all the time, so she saw it for the first time so close. Before the magic infection, it was probably a beautiful gem-like landscape. Now, the forest and lake were very gloomy, because the magic blocked all the light. At this rate, it would take forever to absorb this thick magic, which made Haley a little upset. The girl believed that perhaps someday she would still be able to make this dark lake blue again. She would really like this to happen. And while the girl was thinking about this all the time, the man suddenly came up to her and took her hand and asked what she was thinking about so much. He also said that the water was very ominous, so he advised her not to even look there. But Haley, smiling happily, turned to Reinhard and asked, "I don't think that if you clean this lake, it will be very beautiful." She explained that, "My dream is to live peacefully and calmly, and in the castle of Myron, together with the bell, to do agriculture and raise cattle." So, in such a picture, this beautiful and cleaned lake would fit just perfectly. But Haley also said that if the lake becomes blue, like his eyes, then in the summer it will even be possible to go boating and swimming on the hottest days. She also believed that every morning birds would sing in the forest, and perhaps, like in Snow White, deer would come. And maybe she would even be able to ride a white horse along the lake. The man considered all this to be some kind of crazy fantasy, and did not develop this topic any further. He thought that although she had lost all her memory, she was somehow sure that she wanted to do all this for him. It was very strange. Hilda had those confidences and desires that even he didn't have. He didn't understand where such dreams could come from in her head. For him, it was truly something magical. And so several days passed since they left the castle and set out on their journey. After they passed the mountains and forests and came out onto a wide road, they encountered infected corpses several times a day. Dark energy flowed from their pale skin, and their eyes were ashen in color, as if they were real zombies. These were, mainly, traders who were infected with the plague, heretics and criminals who were expelled from the Three Kingdoms or the Church. Judging by the fact that they were attacking Reinhard from the very beginning, the man came to the conclusion that they had no intention of harming Haley. He also asked if she had ever tried to cleanse them, but the girl did not do this because she was afraid that after cleansing, they could become human again. She believed that even after purification, they would be able to attack her. so she did not want to do this under any circumstances. Then the man heard this and immediately smiled, and said that in that case he was apparently very lucky, since she had cleansed him. Eventually, their journey continued as follows. Zombies would appear, Reinhard would defeat them, and when he became infected with magic, it would come forward and cleanse him. The girl thought that it was possible that it was because of her that he suffered so much in this place. She felt very awkward, especially when he took the initiative and went first to deal with the dead people. But, fortunately, he had not forgotten how to wield a sword, and could easily defeat these creatures. If he had also forgotten how to wield a sword, the art of wielding which she had honed for so long, then it would have been very difficult for him to survive. And then, what was not on her conscience would again become her fault. Despite all this, Haley still considered him rather strange. He came to kill the real character, and now he helped her fake Haley and voluntarily suffered with all this. Reinhard, despite his sick body, continued the grueling hike, and it must have been hard for him. However, he never showed it, and always walked ahead of the girl, and also helped her in many ways. He gave up the only nutritious fruits from the trees to her, and chewed the tasteless roots himself, without even complaining. Even though Reinhard looked much more tired, he was always the first to take over the night watch, and gave Haley the opportunity to rest and sleep first. The girl could certainly assume that he was simply too naive and stupid, but she did not object, because it was for her own convenience. But she did not intend to treat him badly. She didn't say Reinhard until, however, in this contaminated zone she could not eat or sleep, and all because something happened to her body. It changed. At one point, she even wondered if she was human at all. One evening, when she went to bed, Reinhard turned to her and asked if she knew who she was. He asked if she remembered what she had done in the past, and why she lived alone in the Moron Castle. The girl was incredibly surprised when he started asking her about it. She knew that it was definitely not a good sign, so, in order not to reveal herself, she said that she didn't remember it all very well. The man then asked her if she had ever been scared, because she didn't remember who she was. Haley absolutely did not understand why he asked such a thing. However, she said that, of course, this did not happen. In fact, he lost his memory. Therefore, it was strange for her to answer such questions. But Reinhard told her to listen to him carefully when they get to the people. Then she should not tell anyone her name and who she is. In fact, even without his words, she knew little about the real Haley. However, she did not understand why he suddenly said not to give her name, because it was believed that he had forgotten everything, and, accordingly, could not know who she was. But she was going to continue playing along with him for a while, in order to at least find out more about him. The girl sat down next to him, and said that she did not remember who she was when she regained consciousness. She was in an iron cage, and was immediately thrown into a gorge, and with her last strength, she reached the castle of Marin. In order to find out what was wrong with him, she asked if he knew who he was. The man replied that he was the heir to the Winter Ducal family, and now everyone was dead, and there was absolutely nothing left of his family. Anderson probably put him on the wanted list because he committed a minor crime to get into this place. At that moment, Haley realized that this guy really remembered everything, but it was strange to her. Why didn't he kill her in that case? The man replied that since he had entered this zone, everything had become a bit mixed up. He could not explain why he had come to this place with his Russian life. The man knew that the thought that what he firmly believed in could turn out to be a lie, and that the place where he lived could actually be a sandcastle. Haley then realized that his memory was very vague and not perfect. At that moment, he suddenly lowered his head down. It was clearly difficult for him to talk about it. For some reason, the girl even thought that something had happened to him. She felt an evil energy around him. She noticed that he was quite seriously infected, and said that if he felt it right away, he could have said so. She didn't understand why he waited like this until she herself noticed it and started to cleanse it. In the end, the girl took his hand and hoped that he would cleanse himself as soon as possible and recover, so that they could continue their conversation. Reinhard Winter lost only half of his memory. Contrary to her expectations, he turned out to be a pretty good travel companion, and she liked it. He was kind to her, caring, and sometimes even a delicacy. The girl did not understand why such a guy in the original was a symbol of misfortune. He was still the main character, despite everything, and she didn't understand why it was impossible to write at least a happy ending for him, because the man deserved it. When the man fully woke up and fell asleep, Haley was glad that she was able to find him in time. He had not turned into a demon, and his memory, although vague, remained. So, she could gradually cleanse him like this when he was outside the castle grounds. The girl sincerely wished him to quickly find his way in life, and she led him out of the contamination zone so that he could continue to live happily after everything. Haley would like him to confess his love to the main character and live with her in love for centuries, or achieve a high position with the help of the ball, and also be able to rule the world. Whatever he chooses, everything will be fine. But he can no longer be the tragic protagonist, the loser, who only knows this: revenge. After that night, They continued on their way, and did it for quite a long time. But Haley was already so tired that she was ready to give it all up. She was really tired of being constantly on the road. They had already approached the warning sign. They only had to cross a small border, and they would finally be in the right place. Then, their destination will begin, namely the manufacturing city of Selbon. They finally reached the shopping center. Well, or rather, the manufacturing city. It didn't look very attractive. However, the girl was happy about that. The girl was delighted when she finally saw civilization. It meant that she could really get out of that place, and this could not help but make her happy. However, the landscape was too modest for a city. She thought that it could be a small village, after which she asked the man if there was any forge in this sun. How she would like to go into some shop, a bakery or a clothing store. She really needed a lot of things in order to finally live comfortably at home. The man was not sure about the clothing store, but everything else was definitely there before entering one of these stores. He warned her that the name was forbidden. Reinhardt suggested that she just pretend to be his younger sister, and then everything would be fine. The girl did not understand how she could do this. After all, they were not alike at all. But Haley reminded him that he himself was wanted, so he shouldn't have given his name either. Before buying anything, they decided to have a proper meal first. So they went into a small restaurant, where they were immediately met by a young girl who greeted them and said that she was seeing them for the first time. As soon as Hila saw what she was holding in her hands, namely a huge plate with delicious chicken legs, she could not contain her surprise. She hadn't seen all this for a very long time. The girl was ready to pounce on these legs, but she managed to stop in time. When the waitress saw her expression, she immediately asked if everything was okay with them. After all, they hadn't even moved a single step from the threshold. But Reinhard explained that they had been hungry for a very long time. So she asked them to prepare something light for the stomach. The girl said that she would bring the most tender thing they had. And after some time, they already had a hot stew with large pieces of meat and spices on the table, as well as fresh, crispy pastries. It was a broth made from vegetables and meat, and it was truly delicious. Haley didn't even want to eat this food quickly. She was going to savor every carrot that she hadn't eaten for a very long time. Soon the man stood up from his seat and said that he had eaten everything. Of course, upon hearing this, the girl was very surprised because she had just started her meal. But Reinhard told her to continue and not to rush anywhere. He would go get everything he needed. It was more convenient for him to walk alone. He also advised her that as soon as she returned to the castle, she would begin to learn grammar. The girl smiled and asked for forgiveness for the fact that now he was uncomfortable because she was illiterate. But she continued to eat. In fact, everything went according to plan in advance. She told him that she couldn't read, but in fact, over the past year, she had learned all those terrible letters from the novel. Every book in Marin Castle had her fingerprints on it, and the reason she deceived that good man was because she just didn't want to go anywhere. After she continued her scratching, the waitress suddenly came up to her and said that she had prepared dessert. Haley certainly did not refuse. She took this dessert and was amazed at how happy this generous place made the girl. The waitress suddenly smiled and said that so many terrible things had been happening in the area lately, and she was so worried. But she didn't think that there were still people like her who were really hungry. Then, everything immediately became clear to the girls. She thought that Haley was a beggar, and that's why she treated her. The girl decided not to refuse such kindness, because whether she was hungry or not, the issue was not that she had no money. On the contrary, she was very rich. She discovered the treasure while cleaning out Maron Castle over the past year, and inside were mountains of gold bars and treasures, but there were no clothes or food. Now she had only 2 outfits. The dress she found from the cloak, and the dress that Belle sewed from wood fiber. She entrusted the rest of the supplies to Reinhard. She had to get clothes herself. So after her lunch, that was exactly what she was going to do. After Haley finished, she turned to the waitress and said that she wanted to buy some clothes, so she asked where the nearest store was. The girl explained that no one sold clothes in this place. Everyone sewed them themselves. Haley was very upset when she heard this, because she didn't expect everything to turn out like this. But she thought that if the Belle continued to sew, then perhaps he would be able to get the hang of it over time. She asked where she could get some fabric. The woman replied that sometimes a merchant from a big city comes to them, and they buy in advance to make sure they have everything they need. Then Haley made a deal with her to sell her some fabric. They started going upstairs, and the woman asked if her brother really didn't buy her clothes. Haley was indignant and said that he was not her brother. She explained that he had saved her at the entrance to the forest, and she wanted to thank him before they parted. She asked what would be the best way to do this. The maid said that there was no better gratitude in the world than money, so she could easily give him a small amount. In the end, the girl gave her an ancient gold coin that was found in the warehouse of Marin Castle. It was really very precious, so she asked for quite a large amount of clothes in return. Because the coin was ancient, it was different in shape from those in circulation. However, gold is used everywhere, so the waitress was surprised that Haley had it, because it turned out to be much richer than the girl had imagined. In the end, this girl who was filmed Fatima rummaged through the closet for a long time. She gave her 3 dress meat, and almost new kitchen utensils. Meanwhile, Reinhard had already returned from the market. I felt that he had tried very hard to obtain all these things necessary for their primitive life. When they rented a special room to spend the night normally, he showed her everything he had bought, which were the products and seeds that she had asked for. This time he failed to get a magical hearth. Instead, he bought oil that could be set on fire very easily. Haley was very happy when she saw all this product. She asked if they would be able to carry it all. The man did not understand why she was worried about it, because he would be carrying it all. Haley. After all this, she told him to go first to sleep, because he was on guard the whole time they were going to this place, so he deserved to rest. The man did not refuse. He himself planned to rest as well. He advised the girl to get a good night's sleep herself, and tomorrow morning they would go to the market together. They would also need to buy a horse so that they could travel normally. Hatia was surprised and didn't understand why she needed a horse, but the man explained that she had said that she wanted to ride a white horse along the lake, and if they have a horse, they will be able to do normal cleansing with more enthusiasm. After that, he simply went out and closed the door behind him, telling her to rest. The girl, hearing all this, was amazed. She did not expect that Reinhard would really believe that she could cleanse that entire lake. In fact, she planned to leave this time, leaving him alone. The fact that she pretended to be illiterate was just part of her brilliant plan. She believed that in this way, Reinhard would have to do everything alone. He would get tired and fall fast asleep. And over time, he would completely forget about her desire. Haley believed that by that time, the main character should have already appeared, so that they could meet somewhere as destined by fate and fall in love with each other. Therefore, the girl really wanted Reinhard to simply forget about her and live happily and calmly. She also decided to make him forget everything that had happened to him up until now, and live a calm life. After a short rest, Haley packed all her things and decided to leave early in the morning. When the saleswoman saw this, she immediately asked where she was going, and the girl replied that she was already going home. The woman was very surprised and asked why she didn't ask her brother about it when he woke up. The girl again drew attention to the fact that he was not her brother, and also said that it was time for him to go his own way. So he would figure everything out on his own. But the girl still stopped her at the end. She handed over a small bottle and said that it was their signature sauce. She asked Haley to take it with her. It was in gratitude for the fact that she ate with such an appetite. Every time she gave her a dish, it was really valuable for her, especially in recent times. Haley was amazed, because she didn't know if it was possible to share the secret recipe of the establishment just because she ate with appetite. However, she accepted this gift and thanked her. At that moment, she had a feeling that she had not experienced for a very long time. Joy from the kindness of a complete stranger who did not expect anything in return. These feelings made it difficult for Haley, who was about to return to her solitary life with only the bell from now on, and so it was valuable for her to feel this feeling one last time. She thanked Fatima for her kindness and gave her another gold coin. Fatima immediately warned her that she shouldn't give away gold coins like that, because bad people could take the money from her. She also said that even ordinary people might have bad thoughts when they saw shiny gold coins, so she had to be very careful on her way back. Haley thanked her and thought to herself that even though she was being scolded now, she felt joy, and the girl came to the conclusion that she was still a social being. It was a really nice feeling. But that was all the girl knew, that if Fatima knew who she was, she definitely wouldn't be able to worry and care about her so much. She wouldn't even let her in. At least the bell should have been waiting impatiently for Haley at home. He, despite the fact that he grumbled at her every day, however, he still hated being alone. So the girl already wanted to return as soon as possible. When she entered the forest with her huge suitcase, she suddenly soon heard some strange rustling sounds not far from her. And then suddenly several huge men came out to the girl. They had very broad shoulders. One of them asked the girl why she was wandering around late at night in the middle of the forest. Haley was very scared, her voice trembling with fear. She said that she was heading home, but she herself did not understand why they attacked her. At that moment, she assumed that this would be the end for her. They were most likely robbers. However, to her surprise, the man simply walked past her and said that it was very dangerous at such a time. Therefore, she should walk carefully along the road. The girl could not believe that this was really the case and that they would not even attack her. She assumed that they were most likely just local men returning home from work. One of the passers-by even asked his wife to accompany the girl to her place of residence, because after all, it really was very dangerous to be alone like this. But Haley did not agree to this help. She said that everything was fine. To her even greater surprise, the man then handed her some kind of plant. He said that this grass that drove away pests in this place. Mountain mosquitoes are large and poisonous, so it will definitely be useful to her. Haley thanked him, and she herself thought about why the people in this village were so friendly. It was very strange for her that they were so worried. According to all the cliches of the plot, robbers or bandits should have already appeared to take all her money and beat her half to death, or she was supposed to be caught by a slave trader and sold to some really horrible people. Haley moved on and wondered if this novel was somehow especially kind to her. She then suggested that it was most likely because she was not the main character, or because Haley herself was the villain of this novel, and the most terrible person in this world still remained. At that moment, the girl was suddenly called by Reinhard, who finally caught up with her and managed to stop her. When the girl saw him, she was very shocked. She asked what he was doing in this place. Haley replied that she had left him on purpose. Now he had to go his own way, let her go and move on. The man, hearing this, was incredibly shocked, especially after he heard the words she spoke to him during the journey. Haley held his hand. The most evil witch really did it. She wished him happiness, and that's why it was very surprising to him. Because she held his hand every night, his anxiety subsided, and he could fall into a really deep sleep for a short time and get a lot of energy from it. However, even if he dies, he still won't be able to admit it. That evening, the man had another dream, and Haley was involved in it, which really irritated him. He woke up and thought that in the morning they were going to go horse riding. It was still a long way before dawn, so he was going to unwind a little and then fall asleep again. However, when the man turned his head to the side, he saw that there was some kind of amulet lying on the pillow next to him. Then he realized that he was simply set up. All this was a lie. A lie in order to lull his vigilance. Because of this, of course, Reinhard became very angry. He went down to the reception, and the girl said that Haley had told her. The girl was even surprised that they didn't say goodbye, because after all, they had arrived at this place together. Reinhard couldn't believe that all the countless conversations they had while making their way through the demonic forest, and even her questions about whether he knew how to ride a horse or drive a carriage, were all lies, just so she could leave him and go away herself. It seemed to him that if he took her little hand, he would never be able to let go, and even the last fragment of doubt would disappear, which is why he tried so hard to refuse any physical contact. All this happened on the holiday. Haley no longer needed Reinhard, and because of this, the man was incredibly angry. He could not believe that she simply used him. The girl looked at him and said that he shouldn't have followed her at all. She was really angry that he did it. His face at that moment expressed anger and confusion. However, Haley did not understand what he expected, because she certainly could not do anything else for him. She has already shown all the mercy possible to the character responsible for the misfortunes in this novel. Haley saved him from death, and did not let him become half human, half dem. She probably led him to the village where people live, so she did not understand what he wanted from her at all. And besides, she gave him a rather large sum of money, with a reserve, because she understood that he probably wouldn't have that much of it after the fall of his family. In her opinion, this was enough, so she no longer intended to talk to him about anything, or simply turned around and decided to continue on her way. But the man stopped her and asked if she really intended to continue living alone in that contaminated zone for the rest of her life. He said, "I know you have a unique power, but this is just, an abandoned castle is not a place for a normal life." Haley replied that this was her home, and she didn't need him to understand her way of life. And now he just had to go his own way and look for his own joys. Even though she became the enemy of the entire kingdom because of her actions, Reinhard was solely a victim. He was only revered in one kingdom, and there was no way to kill him, so the girl believed that he had to find a new target to protect himself. The girl said that they were nobodies to each other anyway, and that nothing would change if they broke up. She believed that, on the contrary, it would only be much better for the two of them. Reinhard was really angry at that moment. He looked at her with a devastated look and asked, did she really intend to leave him from the very beginning? Haley didn't understand what he meant, because he wasn't hers, so there was no way she could leave him. When the man asked if it was true that her inability to read was also a lie, or if she answered that it was, and because of this, he became even more upset. For him, it was like a knife in the back. The girl said that this was her last service. As soon as he received the cleansing, he should immediately return the same way, and go as quickly as possible so as not to get infected again. Well, the man turned out to be very stubborn. He refused it and said that he didn't want all this. Haley reached out with her hand and said that if he kept going like that, something really bad could happen, so she just had to clear him out. He didn't let her do it. He said that since she was throwing him away so easily, she shouldn't care. He simply asked her to leave and not pay attention to his future. Haley replied that he apparently did not realize the seriousness of his situation, but the man interrupted her again and did not even let her say a word. He was seriously offended by her and said that she could have not cleansed him, and there was no need to feel guilty, as she said. They were strangers to each other, and they had no reason to be together. Haley, of course, couldn't leave it like that. She told him that if she didn't do it, he would die from infection. The man said that he had come to this place from the very beginning for this reason. He was going to die. And for some reason, she took it and saved his life. She wanted to say something else, but he didn't let her do it. Reinhard raised his voice and said that she had so many chances to beat him. However, she never did it. the man himself no longer knew whether his own life belonged to him. Sighing heavily, he said that it would have been better if Haley had simply killed him then, instead of giving him a chance to be saved. After the storm passed, they walked in complete silence until dawn. Reinhard still did not fall behind the girl. He stayed a few steps behind her. Haley walked, turning around, and saw him always. Then she walked further, turning around again and saw him, however, more and more infected. The girl hoped that her ignoring would convey her intentions to him. However, this never happened. In the end, when they were crossing the river, Haley suddenly heard a loud splash of water. Turning back, she saw that it was he who had fallen. The girl immediately ran up to him to help and scolded him. She said that at this rate he would definitely die soon. Reinhard pushed her away from him and told her not to pay attention. He would get there himself. The girl did not understand at all what he meant. She had done a good deed with a pure heart, and therefore did not realize why all this ultimately turned into only big problems for her. In fact, Reinhard just didn't know yet that even though he had failed, new happiness was soon awaiting him. And all because, having freed himself from the shackles of a half-demon, half-human, he will finally be able to plunge into a truly wonderful romance with his beloved. But for some unknown reason, he did not do this. Haley couldn't stand to watch the protagonist neglect his duties any longer, so she yelled at him again. The girl said that he could leave this place and live happily, so she didn't understand why he continued to follow her all this time. The man finally managed to get back on his feet. He said it was none of her business, but Haley said it was directly related to her. She would never take him to that village again, so he had to turn around and go back. She called him by name again, and then suddenly the man realized that he had never called him by name. So he asked how she knew him. Then he suddenly asked in a cold voice, did this mean that her memory loss was also not true? Absolutely everything she said was a lie, and he assumed that the fact that she didn't know him was also a lie. Haley was amazed. She didn't know what to answer him. Of course, she didn't know about the magical kindling because nothing was said about it in the novel. She also didn't know that there were ways to read cards. The girl didn't understand how to explain to her that she hadn't lost her memory, but simply wasn't the real Haley that he was used to. And besides, even if she can find the right words to explain all this, he definitely won't believe her. In the end, she was already fed up with everything on that path. She just turned around and silently began to leave. Haley believed that he could think and judge as he wanted. She was not going to ask him for understanding. The girl didn't even want to be understood, and then suddenly Reinhard asked if she was really going to just take it and leave. Haley didn't know what to answer him. And in general, how could she leave him? Because he wasn't her thing. At that moment, the man was getting worse and worse. He fell to his knees in front of her and asked her not to leave him. The girl looked at his expression and realized that he felt worse. Sweat was running down his body and he had difficulty breathing. With a heavy sigh, she gave him her hand and thought that all this might not have happened if he had not started being stubborn from the very beginning. Sitting down next to him, she said her name and said that she was the evil Dark Witch who destroyed his family and became the enemy of the Three Kingdoms. The man said that he knew this. Haley was very surprised. She asked, "Is it really true that even after he knew this information, he was still ready to go with her?" Then Reinhard smiled and said that everything was exactly like that. He took her hand so that she could cleanse him, and they really went on together. A bright smile finally appeared on the main character, who lived a tragic life and was responsible for all the misfortunes. Haley was really shocked to see it. It was as if she made it clear that the man, after long wanderings, had finally found his way and found peace. In the end, she acknowledged the fact that she had lost, so she allowed him to return home with her, and only then sort out all the details. That same morning, in the kingdom of Konsantar, a village in the northeastern extreme, people went out for their usual trade, and then suddenly they began to spread various rumors. One of the men said that some were saying that soldiers had been sent to the border of the contaminated zone. They suggested that it could even have been an order. The girl who was standing nearby laughed and said that apparently the recently appointed young cardinal was full of energy since he had decided to take care of that area. Some also said that he personally traveled around the borders of the Three Kingdoms and took care of the remote regions. This unusual man was Widgeon Winder Mark. He was one of the 5 coordinators of the order. And in fact, these rumors were true. He even personally gave the poor suffering a piece of bread that they could not afford. After he finished doing this, an assistant came up to him and asked if it was really impossible to entrust this to the accompanying priest. Widgeon had more important things to do, so they didn't understand why he decided to take on this responsibility on his own. The man smiled happily and said that everything was fine. He was just bored while waiting for news, and therefore decided to do some work as well. The assistant at that moment asked him for forgiveness. She knew that making someone you serve wait and finally a career. However, Mr. Widgeon, even for him, the cardinals, Taking care of such screens was not mandatory. In the order of actions, Mr. Vinya was considered a very high-ranking person, and he was indeed appreciated. However, the girl who was his personal assistant knew that he was a man who would accomplish great things, because many could even underestimate him at some points. And all because he dreams of cleansing the contaminated lands and preventing people from being unjustly abandoned. His assistant's name was Jenner when they went into a dark place so that no one would see them. The man asked how the investigation was going in the gorge. The girl replied that they had examined all the places where a person could have been taken, but a lot of time had passed, and of course nothing was left. She also checked the lists of infected people spotted at the northern border over the past year. However, there was no one among them who could be Haley. The assistant told Mr. Vision not to worry. But no matter what kind of magician this witch was, she definitely couldn't survive there. The man didn't even have time to answer, because one of the knights ran up to him and said that they had found a survivor from the Duchy of Winter Reichardt. He was seen running into the forest, deep into the infected zone. The man, upon hearing this, immediately realized that this was the family that Haley had destroyed. As the man, who was rushing around like a beast, swore revenge on Haley, the knight said that some say he looked like he was in a hurry, as if he had incredibly urgent matters to attend to. It was in a village called Selbon, 2 days' ride from the city they were in. When the man heard about this, he was shocked. He said that the one who thirsts for revenge on Haley risked his life and went to the infected zone. So he asked that they be sure to call more knights. They had to go to that place on their own. The man was really serious. At that very moment, Haley had finally returned back to the Bell Castle. Of course, she didn't like the fact that she brought a man back with her, we see, and it was difficult to feed herself. Haley explained that she couldn't get rid of him, so they simply had no choice. Because the forest spirit didn't like it, he didn't show his affection. But no one would ask him for sure. The girl was already waiting for the bell to scold her. However, in a row, she only asked where the volcano was, the sugar and butter she went for. She needed these products to begin with. The girl gave her these products and told the detachment not to worry. How much could be done when there is one strong person? So the three of them could definitely cope with all the difficulties. She looked at Reidhard and said that he was definitely especially strong among people, so they might even be better off than when they lived alone. However, at that moment, Reinhard suddenly felt very bad. He couldn't even stand on his feet. The man lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Then, the squad began to doubt that he was the strongest and most useful. In fact, Reinhard was sick because of his wounds in a place where there was no doctor. No one knew why he was sick and how to treat him. Therefore, they could only believe that he, with his strong constitution, would soon recover. They simply waited, despite the fact that it was incredibly exciting. The Dryad was very angry because they brought a lot of different seeds and did not know how to grow them. However, in the meantime, she had at least learned how to bake bread from the products that they had at that time. From the moment Reinhard lost consciousness, several days passed, and the girl stood in the kitchen with the Triad and said that she was already beginning to worry. In fact, the girl was worried, not only because he had not woken up for a long time, because his indicators had become better, but because he would probably not be able to live with them and not even eat normally. Reinhardt said that what he would eat, he would be able to get himself, so they could not worry about this and think only about their food. In fact, the man had been unconscious for 3 days, and when he finally woke up, he and the Dryad were able to breathe a sigh of relief. The girl gave the man a piece of a bun so that he could restore his strength after a long absence from the key, and asked how he was going to get food on this infected earth. But the man said that he thought he would definitely be able to do better than her, but he said indignantly that she really doubted it, because he would get infected again and collapse, and there would be no one to cleanse him, because she didn't know where he would go. But the man replied that it was all very simple. He was going to hunt in cleared areas. Haley did not stop him. She said that he could easily try, although she knew perfectly well that there was nothing useful there. She smiled happily and said that she wanted to see what kind of great catch he would bring back. And from that moment on, a whole hour passed. They all went hunting, and the man was able to shoot a rather large goose. It was indeed a very good catch. The man had constructed a toy slingshot for himself and could easily hit the flying animals, so they certainly had no problems with dinner. Reinhardt ignored Haley's taunts and simply whittled a branch for his slingshot. At first he held it very uncertainly, but after adjusting the strength and direction several times, he soon began to gather his dinner with terrifying speed. And these were indeed very good carcasses. Physical strength was a truly incredible ability, and the girl was amazed at how much strength he possessed. Eventually, Reinhardt's miserable situation changed completely after his success, and he began to give even them instructions, so that they would not stand aside either. He told Haley to clean the other side tomorrow, and gave her a few more small instructions, so that she wouldn't relax. But the girl turned out to be very stubborn. She said that the other side led to the Selbon, so she did not understand why it was necessary to cleanse it. The man said that it was necessary to pave a road at least wide enough for a carriage, and to arrange supplies so that she could eat her favorite butter and flour without worrying about running out. Haley was outraged. She said that if people found out that she was alive, they would immediately hang her. So she definitely could not afford such luxury. She reminded him that she was an enemy of the Three Kingdoms, and everyone thought she was dead, so such an appearance among people certainly could not end well. Well, the man said that he had just wanted to know earlier why she did it. That's when Haley realized it was time. That was the very question he was supposed to ask once he realized her memory had returned. She knew perfectly well what he wanted to ask. This question was, for example, why did she destroy your family? His with whom she had no feud. Why did she poison the king? He could have asked her about many motives for these crimes, and Haley, of course, could not answer them truthfully, because she herself did not know. All she could do at that moment was convey Haley's feelings that she read about in the side story. That's why the girl told Reinhardt that it was all because the sworn enemy of the Marquis Benishon was precisely his family, and the man she loved was just Cyril Benchen. He wanted to become the heir to the family. But because he was illegitimate, the head of the family and the vassal despised him as much as they could. Because of this, Haley decided to help him perform a feat that no one else could perform. In order to make him his heir, she was going to destroy their sworn enemy, the Duke of Winter. For the sake of her beloved, this is exactly what she did. Just love. Because of this one fleeting, selfish feeling, she put many people to death. Haley herself did not understand how this was possible. However, she could not fix anything. She watched Reinhardt's reaction and thought that perhaps he was angry and would start to rush around again and want to take revenge on her. Of course, she wouldn't want to die from a slingshot. However, the girl didn't have much of a choice. For a while, she just stood there and hoped that he would soon speak and at least let her say her last words. And it did happen. The man spoke. He said the name of Cyril and asked if she also loved Vision and McKellen. The girl, hearing this, was a little surprised. These were familiar names that she had only seen on the Croman's page, and it was strange for her to hear their names from his lips. Haley explained that she saw that he was a friend from the shelter who was her only family, and she considered Michaelin a true friend, as if they had one soul in two bodies. The man, upon hearing this, immediately laughed loudly and asked if she was sure she hadn't mixed anything up, because it was very strange to consider these people family and friends. These idiots not only captured her and put her on trial, but also sentenced her to be hanged and then thrown into the contaminated zone. Which is why Reinhardt found it so funny to hear all this. Haley, indignant, said that she knew this very well herself, so she didn't understand why he decided to remind her about it. The man in this case did not understand her logic at all, so he was not going to continue this conversation. He took the slingshot in his hands again and decided to continue collecting the loot. Well, then Haley began to wonder why he pretended to have lost his memory and came to kill her, and then suddenly began to pretend to be a good guy. The man explained that he did it to survive. He wanted to survive too. So they were closer in some ways than she might have thought. Haley didn't understand how he was going to survive pretending to have forgotten everything, living happily next to the one he was going to take revenge on. It was very strange logic. Now the girl definitely couldn't understand her. However, she believed that if he was so afraid of being killed, then he definitely shouldn't stay close to his sworn enemy. But since Haley was not like that, she wanted to say that in this place, no one would definitely kill me. However, she had no right to do this, so she simply remained silent. There was some silence for a while. And then Reinhardt suddenly asked the girl if she still loved him. When she heard about this, she was very shocked. At first, she did not understand whether he meant someone in particular or all of them. But it wasn't that important because the girl wasn't an original character and didn't even say a word to them, so that definitely couldn't have happened. But Reinhardt, seeing her reaction, immediately made his own conclusions. He felt sorry for her because of this, and said that he really felt sorry that she couldn't choose people. Haley had already started to explain that he had misunderstood everything. However, the man advised her to continue to play the role of an evil villain, because that suited her much better. And so from that moment, several hours passed, and they finally finished their hunt and returned back to the estate. In the end, the man didn't even believe her excuse, and looked at her with pity after that. Haley, of course she didn't like it, but she couldn't do anything. Her arguments simply didn't work. But the girl noticed how well Reinhardt and Belle got along. They were really able to find a common language. The row was bent over with gardening and housework, and Reinhardt was an excellent hunter and knew the way to the market well. But despite all this, the girl was very unhappy, because at this rate she would remain completely useless in this estate and would not be able to help in any way in return. At that moment she was sitting and adjusting the wood in the fireplace, when she suddenly heard some strange sound coming from there. The girl was a little wary, but when a huge, scary butterfly flew out from there, she even screamed a little, because she didn't expect that. Haley took a closer look. It looked like an ordinary moth. However, with such a size, it looked more like a bird. And besides, their gazes somehow crossed with each other suspiciously. She also remembered that they once said that they saw the same one in the Tingbul army, but they said that it was green, and this suspicious butterfly was brown. Haley decided to just go sleep in another room. She thought that she would not be able to fight this butterfly, and she did not even want to try. She started to walk further, but then suddenly, she had a bad feeling. Turning back, she saw how this butterfly began to approach her, closer and closer, and had already released its sting. As soon as she screamed, Reinhard and the Dryad immediately burst into her room and asked what happened. However, they also immediately saw what it was. But surprisingly, Haley was able to limit the flight of this butterfly. She took it into a small dome. The Dryad immediately asked the lady if she had caught it on her own. The girl said that it was so. However, what is most important is that she was able to raise her level. After meeting this strange moth, Haley's abilities improved, and it was noticeable many times over. The next morning, the girl went to the test and learned that she could absorb demonic energy without even touching the defiled place. And now, Haley was clearing a much larger area at once, and they were all very happy about it, because this way, things would go much faster. The girl also developed special shadows that she could control as if she were her own arms and legs, thus releasing the mana accumulated in her body. She looked. It was really very impressive, and even dangerous. Reinhard asked if she had any other abilities, because he wanted to know all aspects. Haley said that, in fact, that was not all. She had another ability that was much more impressive than the previous one. To do this, she found a beetle not far from her, and used magical abilities on it. Everyone immediately thought that she was going to clean it. Because of this, they were not delighted. But the girl only asked them to look carefully. In fact, I walk through the desecrated lands and often encounter creatures that died from mana absorption. They look more like inanimate objects that have lost their life force. Such creatures simply move aimlessly. Haley took this spider and said that it no longer weaves webs and does not hunt. But if concentrated mana is poured into it, this can be easily changed. His shell began to thicken like a crustacean's, and his jaws grew to very long fangs. So when Haley did everything that was necessary, this spider really came to life. Now it looked even more frightening than before. In fact, she discovered this ability completely by accident when she was driving away the beetles with her mana. Reinhard turned to the girl and asked if this could work, for example, on bears and wolves, as well as on people. He was really very interested in this point. Theoretically, it could certainly work, but the girl still wasn't completely sure. And when Reinhard asked her to use it on him, she was also very surprised. But the man said that he would be more useful than an insect. His body would become stronger. He would be able to move around the desecrated lands without fear of death. And then he would even be able to go shopping. The girl, of course, was glad to hear this, because it would really be very convenient for them. But it was all too dangerous, so she refused to conduct such tests on him. Reinhard still thought that it was a very good idea. He would be happy to bring at least some benefit to them all. The girl continued to argue with him, but the Dryad intervened in the conversation and asked, "What about those who are not quite human and not quite demon?" Haley looked at her in surprise and immediately asked what she meant, because she really didn't fully understand her train of thought. But the squad explained that she would like to know what would happen to the defiled if they were somehow turned into demons. She believed that in that case they would be able to come back to life and not just die. The girl thought about it seriously and realized that it really had its own meaning. It was a very unexpected thought. However, she agreed with the Dryad. But Reinhard also intervened in the conversation and said that in this forest there were many people who had unfairly ended up in this place and were killed. So he thought that this could be their chance to save them. But the girl began to be indignant because she knew that this place was mainly used to dump criminals, and if she mistakenly turned a serial killer into a demon, then of course they would have a lot of serious consequences after that. But Reinhard said that if this happens, he will be able to deal with them. The girl argued for a long time and said that in this way they would be doing irreparable harm to their lives, and they definitely had no moral right to do this. However, Reinhard still did not support her thoughts. He said that even under such circumstances, they would still want to live. He was absolutely sure of this. Haley couldn't believe that by saying these words, he began to associate himself with these people, because by saying exactly what he would feel in their place. Eventually, the Dryad yelled at her and said that there was no point in arguing about the essence and dignity of man. At that moment, the most important thing for all of them was that they would continue to live in this castle. And the girl's growth in strength was good in any case, so they couldn't take her words too close to heart. The Dryad simply suggested continuing their argument back in the castle, since, at that moment, they still needed to finish the cleansing so that they would not simply waste time. Thanks to the intervention of the bell, the conversation really ended there. However, they still had a lot of questions, so the atmosphere was quite tense. Haley really wants to know if the people she can revive will really want to live even after becoming a demon. The girl also understood that if Reinhard was right, then for those who were unjustly convicted, this could really be a second chance, and even salvation. But Haley herself was, at the same time, sure of something else. It was this force that, in the original novel, turned Maren Castle into a cradle of demons. And because of this, she was very afraid of such interference. Among all the villains of the original, she was the most vile and terrible, even in human form. The girl feared that Haley had chosen the defiled criminals and turned them into demons. And moreover, if these demons had gained freedom after the girl's death, then it was all just terrible. It's no wonder why Roman's ending was filled with chaos. In the end, she decided that she definitely couldn't use this ability, on people, in order to prevent something like this from happening now. Well, then she didn't yet know that her determination wouldn't last even an hour, and that another difficult test awaited her ahead. As they continued to move forward in order to clear the land, a walking dead man came out to them. Reinhard immediately stepped forward and told them to stay back and not interfere. He was going to protect them. Doha either turned to the man and told him not to chop him down while these zombies were undoubtedly lumberjacks from Selbon. Just last week, they were completely fine, but now they were walking dead. The girl did not understand what had happened to them, and she felt very sorry. These were kind men who were worried that she was walking alone. They were very good people, and even gave special herbs to scare away the terrible insects. Haley didn't understand why they were in this place in such a terrible state. The lumberjacks, who know best about the dangerous days of the desecrated lands, suddenly, all at once, turned into the walking dead. The girl knew that something was definitely wrong there. She turned to Reinhard and said that apparently something had happened in the town since they had transformed. In fact, a few days before Haley met the lumberjacks, new guests came to the very cafe where the girl and the man were staying. These guests turned out to be the Widget and his assistant. He approached the waitress and said that he was looking for one person. Some said that the man who was being pursued by the Horgan had stopped at this place. He had light hair, was tall, wielded a sword, and certainly gave the impression of being an aristocrat. When the waitress saw the great priest, she was very surprised. She said that even though it was just an inn in a remote village, she couldn't just talk about a guest without knowing a special reason. The man told her not to be afraid. The man they are looking for is a wanted criminal from the kingdom of Neva. His name is Reinhard Winter, and they must find him. He said it was a dangerous business, so he couldn't give out details. However, they were looking for him. Only because they needed information that the man directly possessed. It is very important for them to establish his location, so he would ask the girl to tell only the truth, and quickly. Soon after they learned all the necessary information, Jenny turned to the gentleman and asked if it was possible to trust the words of the innkeeper. She believed that the woman could have hidden the Winters herself and simply led them on, but the men said that this could not be found out until they interrogated her properly. In the end, the man said to completely cut off this city and reach everyone who saw Winter and his companion. It was necessary to investigate everything down to the smallest detail, and if someone was hiding something, it was imperative to find out. Jenny said that a pretext was needed to completely freeze, but the man replied that it didn't matter at all. She could have chosen absolutely any pretext for something like that. He also said that those who did not obey had to be sent to the infected lands and immediately executed. They could not allow some minor protests to interfere with them. They were the ones who carried out the will of God, so they didn't have much time. In the end, Jenny sent him to carry out his order, and the girl from the tavern said that this man was with a girl whom, according to him, he accidentally met in the forest and saved. The girl left late at night, alone, and a man quickly followed her. This girl had long black hair, and she was about the same height as the owner of the tavern. Vigent had no doubt at all that it might not have been Haley. He didn't know how her red hair had turned black. However, it wasn't that important. Reinhard Winter is not the kind of person who has enough mental strength to help someone. And the fact that he hastily went to the distant infected lands indicated that somewhere there Haley lived directly. They said that she and her cage were thrown into the gorge. However, Haley could not have died from something like that. The man was absolutely sure that she had survived and gone to the club of infected lands. However, he did not expect that she would not come to him even after a year. He assumed that she could be offended by him because she simply misunderstood his true feelings. Eventually, the gent species would find her soon. He would protect her and show the girl that he was not like those who used her and mercilessly abandoned her. He would really like Helly to finally understand that her place is ultimately next to him, and was ready to make every effort to achieve this. In fact, they knew each other since childhood, they lived in the same orphanage, and one day, when they were walking on the seashore, Wingent said that as soon as they grow up and leave the orphanage, He really hoped that she would be friends with him. The girl did not understand what nonsense he was talking about because she did not believe that he could really leave this place and live without her. After all, they were with a family, and a family should always be together. Only in this way could they protect each other in any situation. The man immediately said that of course he would cleanse her. Then, Haley suggested that they make rings out of pieces of wood and exchange them. This would not be just a toy, but real rings that would keep their vows. It will also be proof of their loyalty to each other, and that they will always be together. I would really like to live together as before, as when they could survive in this cold world, warming themselves only with each other's warmth. A few days after the cellband's numbness, Haley found these lumberjacks in the vicinity of her castle. Reinhard wondered if she really intended to leave these poor folks in this state any longer. He suggested that she could try the sensation on them, since they were kind to her. But the girl began to protest, and said that they were definitely not the ones on whom such experiments should be carried out. She was afraid that because of her carelessness, they could die, and she certainly did not want that. An important organ that used Mada as a source of energy could stop. However, turning them into demons is also impossible. Reinhard said that if they were born to wander forever in such a state, then it would be better to become a demon or die than to be in such a guise all the time. Haley replied that she wasn't ready to do anything about it yet. She needed to know what happened in order to make a final decision. The Dryad was completely against them immediately dropping everything and heading to the city. It would take 5 whole days, and she needed to look after the crops. So she suggested that they just leave together. Thus, on the 3rd day after they went to Selbot, they approached the border of the infected lands, which, unlike last time, was filled with people. When they got closer, they noticed that there was also a flag of the order. Reinhardt said that if they were to hang around in this area and catch the eye of the Light Knights, then everything would only get more complicated. So they had to be very careful, but Haley was furious. She didn't understand why the Order came to these places, and besides, why they spent the night near the territory and not in their comfortable temple. The man immediately said that this is what they were going to find out. But first, it would be better to wait in this place until night and then act. When they were about to leave, the man noticed that she had not even moved from her place. He was very surprised and asked what she had seen there that had made her so petrified. In fact, Haley couldn't help but recognize the man she saw at first sight, and that's why she couldn't even move. The girl didn't know why she recognized him. Perhaps because she was in Haley's body, or because of his appearance. However, she recognized the wind jet perfectly. In a quiet voice, the girl asked why he was in this place. Reinhard, who was surprised, watched her reaction and did not understand what was wrong. In fact, the widget was her peer, but from the orphanage, she considered the only family in this whole world. Then suddenly the man stayed in his place, and decided to suggest that the girl break through right now. Of course, Haley yelled at him and asked if he had accidentally gone crazy. After all, he himself had just suggested breaking through at night because this was the most reasonable option for them. The man said, if the local chief is just some guy who uses women, then that changes things completely. Haley yelled at him and asked him to calm down because she definitely didn't want him to leave her and go there on his own. But at that moment, Haley felt a distinct gaze on her that pierced coldly from a fairly large distance. And it belonged, of course, to the widget. The man looked straight at the girl and couldn't believe his eyes. It was really her. The girl immediately grabbed Reinhard and began to turn around. She said that they needed to leave there immediately. The guy didn't understand her reaction at all, but she explained that she couldn't be found alive. Reinhard tried to calm her down. However, at that moment, they heard Vision's loud voice addressing Haley. The knights immediately started running towards her. They had to catch her. They called the girl an evil witch and did not understand how she survived at all. Then, Reinhard realized that they had been exposed and was already ready to run away from there as well. At that moment, the girl smiled. In fact, this situation was incredibly absurd for her. And that was exactly what made her laugh. She tried so hard to avoid this man, but she didn't understand why the vigilante was so close to her. Since the beginning of the original novel was told from the perspective of the main character, the girl was completely unaware of the previous actions of the widget that appeared much later. Let's say this one. Now, she understood that at that time, he was looking for Haley in this forest. At that moment, the knights started shooting in order to catch the girl, but Reinhard managed to react in time and deflected these arrows. They continued to run. However, the girl understood that if everything continued like this, they would easily catch up with them. She did not like this prospect at all. She told the man to take her in his arms and run. The man was of course surprised. However, he understood why she did this, and still made sure that she ended up in his arms. But before that, he warned her to hold on tightly. Haley knew that if they crossed the borders of the infected lands, they would be able to break away from them. and that is why she asked to be picked up in order to simultaneously treat the Reinhard in case of infection. The girl really thought that they would not catch up with them from there at that moment, when a sound was heard that was impossible to ignore. But the heroine hearts were already on the verge of crossing the contaminated lands. The girl heard someone's voice saying that the innkeeper and the residents of Selbang would be judged as heretics. And all of this was because of Haley. The girl did not understand what kind of nonsense they were talking about and how this was even possible. The person who spoke all these words turned out to be Jenny, the saint's assistant. She said that since the girl dared to listen to the order's verdict and chose life, then God would pass judgment on those people who helped her for profit. At that moment, a girl was brought out of the tavern into the girl's field of vision. Zhenya, smiling happily, said that this was the price that this woman paid for receiving gold coins from Haley and helping her. The girl did not understand at all why this happened together with Reinhard. She stopped and watched everything. This woman was a simple innkeeper who loved gold coins and was too curious. So this was certainly an unfair punishment towards her. But even at that moment, Fatima was giving Haley signs that she should run away quickly. The girl did not understand why this damned fantasy world also only drains good people. At that moment, she was really overcome with rage. She began to activate her magical abilities and turned to Jenny. The girl said that she had tried very hard all this time to live in the shadows, and it was worth her only once to go out when something like this happened. She didn't even hear what Vision's assistant was shouting. She turned to Rayhand and told him to quickly save Fatima. This was the most important thing. At that moment, the girl began to spread this infection. People immediately began to run away because they understood that it could easily affect them. Jenny didn't understand what kind of nonsense this was because she believed that the infected zone couldn't get bigger or smaller. Then she looked more closely and noticed that it was all Haley Marin who was controlling the demonic energy. However, she had never seen anything like this before, so she didn't know how this could happen. At that moment, the Vigent himself suddenly galloped up to them on horseback. He turned to Haley and told her to stop and they could calmly discuss everything together. He said he knew she was mad at him, but just for a moment, he wished she would stop. He really thought they could talk things out calmly. When Haley heard this, she immediately laughed. She didn't understand what kind of nonsense he was talking about. If this man wanted this, then there was no point in torturing the innkeeper. Now she certainly wasn't going to talk to him calmly. He also shouldn't have turned innocent people into zombies. He shouldn't have even done that to Haley in the first place. The girl looked at him with disgust and told him to get out. She didn't even want to talk to hypocritical idiots like him. Haley had already suffered a lot because of him, and the girl herself certainly wouldn't want to repeat her fate and make the situation worse. She knew perfectly well that if her character was truly important to him, he would have left the Order long ago. But it was precisely because of him that Haley, who hated the Order, was unable to fight back and simply ran away. And yet he, like those idiots, testified that Haley was a villain. He said that it was necessary to take away her magic so that she would no longer do evil. The girl began to come closer, spreading evil energy around. She no longer cared whether they were God's viceroys or anyone else's. But if these people continue to behave like this, she will definitely not leave it that easily. Haley didn't care at all that this man could take his anger out on her instead of a real character. She was a reader who empathized with Haley so much that she cried until she was exhausted. So now the girl knew exactly what she would do. She screamed loudly and said that from now on this was her land, and if they crossed this line, she would kill them all. It was the girl's revenge for how they treated Haley. And in the end, the Holy Knights, fearing the further spread of the infection, let poor Fatima go and left. For several days, while they were returning to the castle of Marin with Fatima, who now had nowhere to go, the girl cried and cried all the time. She clung to them and thanked them more and more each time. The girl was so scared that now that she was safe, she still couldn't calm down. To accept the reality that changed overnight will certainly take time, or would like to help the girl with anything, just to ease her suffering. And it was really, with all her heart, she was worried about Fatima. From that moment on, several days passed, and the girl had already settled into the castle. Now she had to live there with them, and because of this, she was truly happy. The girl hoped that they would get along well with each other, because they were a family, of course. Haley said that she wanted to help her in any way, but she didn't think that she would decide to stay with her in the castle. The girl asked why she was going to live with them, because she thought that she would soon want to return back to the city. But Fatima replied that in such a situation, she definitely could not go back. And here the Cardinal man was also very scary. He looked as if he did not stay until he found Madame Maga. Therefore, she definitely could not go back. But Haley said that she could have gone to another city and started all over again. The girl was even going to give her a few gold coins. She could have taken them and found a job for herself. Everything would have definitely worked out. The girl then asked, what if they catch her? She escaped during the trial. So if they catch her, they will probably want to execute her again. As soon as Haley heard about this, she became seriously worried. She understood that this problem was really serious. Fatima said that in such a large castle, they probably need at least some workers. She heard that, or does not know how to do anything, and the young duke only knows how to hunt. So the dear Triad can die from overwork. The girl guessed from whom she could hear this, so she decided to have a serious conversation with her. She sat down next to Fatima and asked if she even understood how terrible it was to live on the run. Haley explained that everyone who lives in this estate is a scum, who can't even proudly reveal their personal past. She asked, was the girl really ready to stay there with them, even after this? Fatima said that it was certainly so. Her home, the store, her hometown, all this disappeared out the window in an instant, and she was too scared to start everything from scratch in an unfamiliar place. She also didn't want to be left completely alone, with no strangers or friends around her, so she was ready to really give up everything if it meant that she would at least have them. At that moment, Haley seriously thought about her words. Despite the fact that she had lived alone all this time, however, in her hometown she still had familiar neighbors and friends, so it was quite obvious that she definitely did not want to be alone. The girl looked at the lady and, smiling, said that she knew perfectly well that the girl was the savior who saved her life, and for this, she was certainly incredibly grateful to her. Besides, she was so cool when she declared these lands as her territory that she was absolutely sure that being next to Haley, she would be safe. The girl even called her a ruler, and as soon as Haley heard this, she was very amazed, because she herself considered herself a hermit naturalist without a title and possessions. So she did not understand how she could now receive such a serious status. Well, it was still very good. Some time has passed since then, and it didn't take a lot of nerves for you to get used to life in their new domain. The first few days, she seemed to cry quietly, even at night. However, being very persistent and hardworking, she was able to get used to this house very quickly. At first, Haley was, of course, a little less than thrilled that there were now even more of them. However, as soon as she tried food made from sweet, tender flour, everything became completely unimportant. Eventually, she even began to want Fatima to never go anywhere and always live with them. At breakfast one fine sunny day, the Hartza district talked to her about their usual affairs. The man asked her if she knew the history of the contaminated zone. The girl was very surprised to hear this and asked why he suddenly started talking about this. And how was she supposed to know this? But Reinhard said that since she had become a seer, it wouldn't hurt to know some general information about the territory she now rules. First, about the first owner of this castle, Marchese Moroni. So he decided to share with her this very important information so that the girl would be familiar. In fact, opinions about his personality differ. There is a theory that he was a scientist interested in demonology. But at the same time, there were also suggestions that he was the first dark magician who managed to summon a demon. However, what they absolutely needed to know was that this land did not originally belong to any of the three kingdoms, and before and after the infection, it belonged to the Marin family, and not to the Order. Hardin said that if she is the only remaining member of the Marin family, then she can truly claim that this high castle, the lake, the forest, and the gorge are all undoubtedly her property. As soon as the girl heard about this, you were amazed. She could not believe that this entire, huge, hopeless earth was her possession. The girl at that moment even assumed that he had decided to appease and deceive her. She considered herself not so naive, so of course she did not believe his words. Haley said that, as he said now, she can boldly say that this is her Earth, because the current contaminated zone is an abandoned land in which no one is able to live. However, she believes that if the three kingdoms find out that she has cleared this place and this Earth, which is located in the center of all these queens, becomes suitable for life, then armies will come from all sides to capture it. Such verbal games would be really useless. Min did not deny this factor and agreed with her. But he also said that the three kingdoms cannot just get close to this place. Haley was a little surprised when she heard this, but then she remembered a very important factor. The fact that, in the original, the three kingdoms were practically enemies. These kingdoms were called Hold Nebo and Consantor. These three kingdoms, with roughly equal strength, originally constantly restrained each other and waged countless intrigues. Now the girl understood perfectly well why this land still remained the private property of the Morone family. So she calmed down a little. Haley I confirm his words. She said that if one person goes there, the other two will get angry. This was true, and also this factor could easily develop into a war, and in order to prevent this, the three kingdoms simply entered into a special agreement. The contaminated zone is often the property of the Marone clan, so no one can claim ownership of it. The Order even assured this, so that there would definitely not be any fools who would decide to be the first to break the agreement. But then, Haley suddenly thought about the fact that she did not understand the Order's motivation in that case, to dump criminals on foreign soil. Reinhard explained that this was to convince everyone that God is a merciful being who loves all people equally. The priests, as the viceroys of God, should not commit murder. The girl was struck at that moment, and realized that to some extent she should be grateful, because she would have been dead long ago if there had not been such a rule. And now, thanks to a miracle, she received the title with the lands. Haley was very happy, because she really realized the fact that she was now a real marquise. They decided to call Fatima the chef, and Reinhard was a soldier. The Dryad, of course, also entered the conversation and asked who she was, but the girl decided to simply call her peasant, insidiously. However, as soon as the girl thought that all this was hers, her mood immediately changed. From a life in exile, where she had to survive in limited conditions and status, she became a real manager. And now she really had a lot of things to do. The situation didn't change. However, her perception definitely changed, and this already meant a lot to the girl. Reinhardt said that since she had declared herself the head of the family, in old noble families, when the previous head died or retired, the heir would gather the vassals and declare himself the head, even with them. These are old customs. However, the more traditional the family, the more obligatory this ceremony is. Haley said that since she really did it, now she had to say a few important words to them. The girl said that in this place, only she has the surname Marin given to her. That is, she is the only heir to the previous head of the family. So, from that day on, the girl was officially a marquise. She decided to confirm this among all the witnesses so that no one else would have any doubts about this. Their days passed rather calmly. Reinhard had gone out that week to get protein for their balanced diet, and Bellflower was busy restoring the field that had been ruined by the ducks they had brought in for the household. The wind was light and cool, and the sun was very warm, and in the hand was an ear or a piece of bread, and it was real bread, baked from the last flour. Now they were faced with a serious choice: to return to the poor and primitive life of the ascetics, or to risk their peaceful lives by going shopping in a specialized world in order to replenish their supplies, which were no longer available.